On a freezing December night, a 28-year-old black steelworker drags himself home after another brutal shift. At a lonely park bench, he spots a frightened boy and his ailing grandmother, stranded with no money and nowhere to go. Remembering his mother's words, "Help when you can," he offers them shelter. But that simple act of kindness leads him into a shocking family secret and a fight for justice that will change all of their lives. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The factory whistle pierced the cold December air at exactly 11:47 p.m., signaling the end of another grueling shift. Steam rose from the manholes in the cracked asphalt as workers shuffled out like ghosts, their faces etched with exhaustion under the flickering neon lights of Johnson's Steelworks. Marcus Johnson pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders. The name on the factory sign felt like a cruel joke. No relation to him, just another reminder that some people owned things while others just worked in them. At 28, his hands were already scarred from 5 years of loading steel beams, his back aching from dreams deferred. He walked past the liquor store where old-timers gathered, past the check-cashing place with its bulletproof glass, past the bus stop where a mother bounced a crying baby while checking her phone for the late bus. This was his world, a forgotten corner of Detroit where people worked hard and still couldn't catch a break. Marcus stopped at the corner of 8th and Main, the same spot where he'd said goodbye to his mother 3 years ago. The ambulance had pulled away from their apartment building on a Tuesday morning just like this, taking with it the only person who'd ever believed he could be more than another black man with calloused hands and an empty bank account. "You're smart, baby," she'd whispered in that hospital bed, tubes snaking from her arms. "Don't let this world tell you otherwise." But smart didn't pay for cancer treatments. Smart didn't keep the lights on when the factory cut overtime. Smart just meant you understood exactly how stuck you were. Marcus reached his apartment building, a 3-story brick structure that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled of cabbage and broken dreams. Kids' bikes cluttered the entrance, and someone had scrawled hope in blue chalk on the mailbox wall, though half the letters had been rubbed away by careless shoulders. In his 1-bedroom apartment, Marcus heated a can of soup on his hot plate and stared at the community college brochures scattered on his kitchen table. "Pre-med," they said. "It's never too late to pursue your dreams," the glossy covers promised. He'd picked them up 6 months ago, filled out the application twice, but never sent it in. Dreams cost money he didn't have, time he couldn't spare. Marcus fell asleep that night with the TV news droning about another factory closing, another neighborhood forgotten. He didn't know that tomorrow would change everything. The next evening, Marcus took a different route home. The bus had broken down, again, and walking gave him time to think. The December air bit at his face as he cut through Riverside Park, a small patch of green squeezed between the factory district and the interstate. That's when he saw them. An elderly woman sat hunched on a wooden bench, her thin frame shivering despite a heavy coat that had seen too many winters. Beside her, a young boy, maybe 10 years old, pressed close for warmth, his small arms wrapped around her shoulders like he was trying to hold her together. Marcus slowed his pace, something about the scene pulled at him. The way the boy's eyes darted to every passing car, the way the woman's hands shook, not just from cold but from exhaustion that went bone deep. "You folks okay?" Marcus called out, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The boy looked up with eyes too serious for his age. "We're waiting for the bus, but," his voice cracked. "But it's not coming tonight. They said the route suspended." Marcus stepped closer. The woman lifted her head, and he could see tears frozen to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't want to trouble nobody." "No trouble, ma'am." Marcus knelt down to the boy's eye level. "What's your name?" "Daniel Miller." "This is my grandmother, Mrs. Evelyn." The boy's chin quivered as he fought back tears. "We came to see my mama, but someone took our money on the bus. Grandma's got a bad heart, and she can't walk all the way home." Marcus looked at Evelyn Miller, really looked. Her weathered hands clutched a worn purse, the kind his own grandmother had carried. Her shoes were old but clean, polished with care. These weren't people looking for a handout. These were people who'd hit a wall they couldn't climb over. "How far is home?" Marcus asked. 47 blocks, Daniel whispered. "I counted on the way here." Marcus's apartment was 6 blocks away. He had half a can of soup left, some crackers, maybe enough coffee for 3 cups. It wasn't much, but his mother's voice echoed in his head. You help who you can when you can. Come on, Marcus said, standing up and extending his hand to Evelyn. You're not walking anywhere tonight. My place isn't fancy, but it's warm. Evelyn's eyes widened. Oh no, son, we couldn't. Yes you can. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. My mama raised me better than to leave folks in the cold. Daniel looked between his grandmother and Marcus, hope flickering in his young eyes. Grandma, please, you're shaking real bad. Evelyn studied Marcus's face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she slowly nodded and took his offered hand. As they walked toward Marcus's building, Daniel stayed close to his grandmother's side, one small hand holding her elbow to steady her steps. The boy was protective, mature beyond his years, something Marcus recognized. Poverty aged kids fast. Thank you, Evelyn whispered as they climbed the steps to Marcus's apartment. God bless you for your kindness. Marcus unlocked his door, suddenly seeing his humble space through their eyes. The second-hand furniture, the hot plate, instead of a real stove, the community college brochures still scattered on the table. But Daniel's face lit up when the heater kicked on. It's so warm, the boy exclaimed, then immediately looked embarrassed by his outburst. Sit anywhere you like, Marcus said, clearing newspapers from his couch. Let me see what I can rustle up for dinner. As he heated the soup and found some crackers in his cabinet, Marcus listened to the soft murmur of Daniel's voice as he helped his grandmother settle on the couch. The boy was careful with her, adjusting the thin throw pillow behind her back, making sure she was comfortable. This kid was special, Marcus could tell. Marcus set 3 mismatched bowls on his small table, along with a sleeve of saltines and 3 glasses of water. It wasn't much, but he divided the soup equally, giving them the bigger portions. This is a feast, Evelyn said, though tears were gathering in her eyes again. You don't know what this means to us. As they ate, the story slowly came out. Evelyn's voice grew steadier with each spoonful of warm soup, and Daniel filled in details when his grandmother's voice failed her. My daughter Laura, Evelyn began. She married this man, Richard Thompson, about 2 years ago. She was trying so hard to build a good life for Daniel after his daddy passed. Richard seemed nice enough at first, her voice trailed off, and Daniel picked up the thread. But then he changed, didn't he, Grandma, and his parents, they don't like us. They say they use words I'm not supposed to repeat. Marcus set down his spoon. What kind of words, son? Daniel looked at his grandmother, who nodded sadly. They call us freeloaders, say Mama married their son for his money. But Mama works 2 jobs. She cleans offices at night and works at the grocery store during the day. Evelyn's hands trembled as she continued. Richard's family, they got money. Big house, fancy cars. They never wanted Laura to marry into their family, but Richard insisted. Now they treat her like she's beneath them, and they don't want us around, Daniel added quietly. Richard's mama said I'm not really Richard's responsibility, and Grandma's just a burden. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, the kind that came from recognizing an old story with new faces. So why were you trying to visit today? Daniel's face brightened for the first time all evening. Tomorrow's my birthday, I'm turning 11, and Mama promised she'd see me, even if it was just for an hour. She said she missed me so much it made her stomach hurt. Evelyn wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Laura wanted to meet us at the park downtown. She can't bring us to the house. Richard forbids it, says we're not welcome in his home. But someone on the bus, Daniel's voice got smaller. This man asked to see Grandma's purse, said he was checking for the bus driver. But then he ran off with our money. $23, that was all we had for bus fare home. Marcus pushed back from the table, his jaw clenched. $23. These people had been stranded for $23, money he spent on lunch some days without thinking twice. Did you get to see your mama? Marcus asked gently. Daniel shook his head, tears finally spilling over. She waited for 2 hours at the park. She texted Grandma's phone asking where we were. Grandma had to tell her what happened, and Mama started crying right there on the phone. She said Richard was already mad at her for asking to leave the house, and now she'd gotten in trouble for nothing. Evelyn reached over and squeezed Marcus's hand. Laura's not in a good situation, son. I can see it in her eyes when we do get to visit. She's scared and trapped. Marcus had seen that look before. His neighbor Mrs. Washington had worn it for months before her husband finally put her in the hospital. The walk on eggshells, the flinching at raised voices, the way someone's whole body could apologize without saying a word. "What's your daughter's number?" Marcus asked suddenly. Evelyn looked surprised. "Why?" "Because it's still early, and because that boy deserves to talk to his mama on his birthday, even if it's a day early." Daniel's head snapped up, hope blazing in his young face. "Really? You'd let me call her?" "Course I will." Marcus pulled out his phone. "What's the number?" As Evelyn recited the digits, Marcus dialed and handed the phone to Daniel. The boy's hands shook as he held it to his ear. "Mama?" Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "Mama, it's me. A nice man is helping us. His name is Mr. Marcus, and he gave us soup and he's letting me call you." Marcus could hear a woman's voice through the phone, thick with tears and relief. He stepped back to give Daniel privacy, but he caught enough to understand that Laura was beside herself with worry. "I love you too, Mama," Daniel whispered into the phone. "I love you so much. And Grandma's okay, I promise. Mr. Marcus is taking care of us." When Daniel finally handed the phone back, his face was streaked with tears, but he was smiling for the first time all day. "She wants to talk to you," Daniel said to Marcus. Marcus took the phone hesitantly. "Hello? Oh my God, thank you." The woman's voice was raw with emotion. "Thank you so much. I've been going crazy with worry. When Mama told me what happened, I couldn't even think straight." "They're safe," Marcus assured her, "and they're welcome to stay the night if they need to." There was a pause. "Then I don't even know your name, but you've been kinder to my family in one evening than some people have been in years." "I'm Laura Thompson, Marcus Johnson, and it's no trouble at all, ma'am. I wish I could come get them, but Richard," her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Richard doesn't know I called them today. He thinks I was grocery shopping. If he found out I was trying to see Mama and Daniel, I don't know what he'd do." Marcus caught the fear in her voice, the way it trembled on her husband's name. "Mrs. Thompson, are you okay? Are you safe?" A long pause. "I have to go. Please tell Daniel I love him, and give Mama my love too. Thank you again, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for being an angel when we needed one most." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone with a growing sense of unease. That night, Marcus gave up his bed to Evelyn, and slept on the couch while Daniel curled up in the armchair with an extra blanket. Before they went to sleep, the boy had whispered, "Mr. Marcus, will you help us get home tomorrow?" "I'll figure something out," Marcus had promised. But as he lay awake listening to Evelyn's labored breathing and Daniel's soft snores, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that getting them home was going to be the easy part. It was what they'd find when they got there that worried him. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work, the first time he'd missed a shift in 2 years. He used his last $20 to buy bus passes for all 3 of them, plus a small birthday cupcake for Daniel from the corner store. Daniel's eyes went wide when Marcus presented it to him at breakfast. "For me? Really? Every boy deserves something sweet on his birthday," Marcus said, lighting a birthday candle he'd found in his kitchen drawer. As they rode the bus toward the Thompson house, Daniel pressed his face to the window, counting blocks and landmarks. 17 more stops, he announced. "Then we walk 4 blocks south." Marcus watched the neighborhoods change as they traveled. The industrial wasteland where he lived gave way to modest working-class homes, then to a subdivision with newer construction and manicured lawns. Not wealthy, exactly, but comfortable. The kind of place where people had driveways and 2-car garages. "That's it," Evelyn said quietly, as they walked down a tree-lined street. The white house with the blue shutters. Marcus looked at the Thompson home. It was nice, not mansion nice, but solid middle class. A late-model SUV sat in the driveway next to a smaller sedan. The lawn was perfect, the walkway swept clean. From the outside, it looked like the American dream. Daniel broke into a run as they approached the front door, but Evelyn caught his arm. "Wait, baby, let me ring the bell first." The front door opened before they could knock. A young black woman stood in the doorway, and Marcus immediately saw where Daniel got his serious eyes. Laura Thompson was petite and pretty, but there was something fragile about her, like she was holding herself together by sheer will. "Mama?" Daniel launched himself into her arms, and Laura's composure finally cracked. She buried her face in her son's shoulder and sobbed. "Oh baby boy," she whispered. I was so scared, I was so scared. Evelyn stepped forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. We're okay, sweetheart. We're all okay. Marcus hung back, feeling like an intruder in this family moment. But then Laura lifted her head and looked at him over Daniel's shoulder. You must be Marcus, she said, wiping her eyes. I can never thank you enough. Up close, Marcus could see the exhaustion in Laura's face, the way her hands shook slightly even as she held her son. But there was something else, a purple shadow along her left jaw that makeup couldn't quite hide. Before Marcus could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from inside the house. Laura's whole body went rigid. Laura, who's at the door? A man's voice, sharp with authority. Richard Thompson appeared behind his wife, and Marcus immediately understood why Daniel and Evelyn had looked so small and scared the night before. Richard was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a doorway. His eyes swept over the group with obvious displeasure. Oh, Richard said, his voice flat. Them, Richard, Laura said quickly. This is Marcus Johnson. He helped Mama and Daniel when they got stranded yesterday. He's been so kind, I'm sure he was. Richard stepped fully into the doorway, effectively blocking Laura from view. His eyes locked on Marcus with unconcealed suspicion. Thanks for bringing them by. We can handle things from here. Marcus felt the dismissal like a slap. He looked past Richard to where Daniel was still clinging to his mother, and saw the boy's confused expression as he picked up on the tension. No problem, Marcus said evenly. Just wanted to make sure everyone got home safe. Well, they did. Richard's smile was sharp around the edges. So thanks for your service. The word service came out like Richard was talking to a hotel bellhop, not a man who'd spent his last $20 on bus fare for strangers. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but Evelyn's voice stopped him from responding. Marcus, son, you have our gratitude always, she said, moving closer to him. Her eyes were pleading, not just thankful but warning. You're a good man. Yes, Laura said from behind her husband. Thank you so much, truly. Marcus nodded, but something made him pull out his phone. Daniel, he called out, come here for a second. The boy looked questioningly at his mother, who nodded. Daniel approached, and Marcus knelt down to his level. I want you to put my number in your grandma's phone, Marcus said quietly, handing Daniel his phone. You know, just in case you ever need anything. Daniel's small fingers flew over the screen. Like if we get stuck again. Like if anyone needs help with anything. Marcus said, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Laura. Anything at all. Richard stepped forward. That won't be necessary. We take care of our own. I'm sure you do, Marcus replied, standing up and looking Richard directly in the eye. But it never hurts to have friends. For a moment the two men stared at each other. Marcus was shorter and lighter, but there was something in his expression that made Richard's jaw tighten. This wasn't going to be as simple as intimidating another one of Laura's relatives. Well, Richard said finally. Thanks again. Laura, get them inside. Breakfast is getting cold. As the family moved toward the door, Daniel broke away and ran back to Marcus. Thank you for my birthday cupcake, he whispered, hugging Marcus tightly. And for taking care of Grandma. You're the nicest person I ever met. Marcus hugged the boy back, his heart breaking a little. You take care of yourself, okay? And take care of your grandma and your mama. Under the cover of the hug, Marcus quickly slipped a small piece of paper into Daniel's pocket. His phone number written hastily on a napkin from breakfast. If anyone needs help, he whispered so quietly only Daniel could hear, call this number. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and stepped back. I will take care of them, he promised solemnly. As Marcus walked away from the house, he could feel Richard's eyes on his back. He didn't turn around, but he memorized the address, the layout of the street, the position of the neighbors' houses. Something told him he'd be coming back. Marcus tried to put the Thompson family out of his mind, but it wasn't easy. For 3 days he went through his normal routine. Work, home, simple dinner, restless sleep. But every time his phone rang, his heart jumped, wondering if it might be Daniel calling for help. On the third night, at 11:43 p.m., it finally happened. Marcus was just getting out of the shower when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it. NIS telemarketers called at all hours these days, but something made him answer. Hello, Mr. Marcus. The voice was barely a whisper, shaking with fear. Daniel, is that you? Yes, sir. I found your number in my pocket. You said to call if we needed help. Marcus's blood went cold at the terror in the boy's voice. What's wrong, son? Richard is really mad, madder than I've ever seen him. He found out somehow that we stayed at your house, and he's yelling at Mama real bad. He said terrible things about you, and about us. In the background, Marcus could hear raised voices, Richard's angry shouts getting louder. Where are you right now, Daniel? Hiding in the bathroom upstairs with Grandma. We locked the door, but Richard keeps banging on it, telling us to come out. The sound of splintering wood came through the phone, followed by Richard's roar of rage. He's breaking something downstairs, Daniel whispered frantically. Mr. Marcus, I think he's really going to hurt Mama this time. Marcus was already pulling on his clothes, the phone pressed between his ear and shoulder. Listen to me very carefully, Daniel. I need you to hang up and call 911 right now. Tell them there's domestic violence happening, and someone might get seriously hurt. But what if Richard gets even madder? He can't get much madder, son. And the police need to know what's happening. Call them first, then call me back if you can. I'm on my way. You're coming. I'm coming. Just hold on, okay? Keep that door locked, and don't come out until the police get there. Marcus could hear Daniel's ragged breathing through the phone. Mr. Marcus, I'm really scared. I know you are, buddy, but you're being so brave. Just a little longer, okay? Okay, I'm calling 911 now. The line went dead, and Marcus grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding as he raced toward a family he barely knew but couldn't abandon. His work boots pounded against the sidewalk as he covered the 3 blocks back to the White House with blue shutters. The shouting was audible from the street now, Richard's voice booming with rage. Marcus crept around to the side of the house, staying low beneath the windows. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see into the kitchen. Richard had Laura backed against the counter, his finger jabbing at her face as he screamed. Don't care what sob story they gave you. You don't give our number to every vagrant off the street. He's not a vagrant. Laura's voice was strained, but defiant. He helped my family when they needed it. He was kind to them. Kind? Richard's laugh was ugly. You think that man was being kind. You think he just happened to find them, and decided to play Good Samaritan. Wake up, Laura. He was probably working with whoever robbed them in the first place. Marcus felt sick. Of course Richard would spin it that way. Of course he'd make Marcus the villain in this story. That's not true, Laura said firmly. Mama said he was genuine. Daniel said. Daniel is 10 years old, and your mother would trust a snake if it smiled at her. Richard grabbed Laura's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. I told you before about bringing your people around here. My parents already think I made a mistake marrying you. Do you want to prove them right? Laura tried to pull away, but Richard's grip tightened. Richard, you're hurting me. I'm trying to protect this family. Do you know what the neighbors are going to think when they see strange black men hanging around our house? The racism hit Marcus like a physical blow. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking as he activated the camera function. Whatever happened next, he wanted evidence. Let go of me, Laura said, her voice stronger now. You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I'll show you ridiculous. The slap echoed through the kitchen window. Laura's head snapped to the side, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. Marcus's finger hit the record button. Richard, stop. Evelyn's voice came from the kitchen doorway. The elderly woman moved as quickly as she could, positioning herself between Richard and Laura. Please, son, there's no need for this. Don't call me son, Richard snarled. And don't tell me how to discipline my wife in my own house. Discipline? Evelyn's voice rose with indignation. That's not discipline, that's abuse. Richard took a step toward Evelyn, his fist clenched. You want to see abuse, old woman? That was enough. Marcus pocketed his phone and moved toward the front door, but before he could reach it, his phone rang again. Daniel's terrified voice filled his ear. Mr. Marcus, Richard's coming upstairs. I can hear him on the steps. Stay in that room, Marcus ordered. Do not open that door. Marcus ran to the front door and rang the bell, leaning on it until the chimes echoed through the house. The shouting stopped abruptly. Heavy footsteps approached the front door, and it swung open to reveal Richard's furious face. What the hell do you want? I forgot to give Daniel something. Marcus said calmly. For his birthday. Get off my property. Richard? Laura appeared behind him, her cheek red and swelling. Is everything okay? Marcus looked directly at her. Are you okay, ma'am? She's fine, Richard snapped, and it's none of your business anyway. Actually, Marcus said, his voice steady and clear, when someone hits a woman, it becomes everyone's business. Richard's face went white, then flushed red with rage. You better watch yourself, boy. The word boys hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt his own anger rising, but he kept his voice level. I'm not your boy, and I'm not going anywhere until I know Mrs. Thompson and her family are safe. You threatening me? I'm saying I care about what happens to them. Richard stepped onto the front porch, closing the door behind him. He moved close to Marcus, using his height advantage to loom over him. Let me make something clear, Richard said quietly. What happens in my house, with my family, is none of your concern. You come around here again, and we're going to have problems. Marcus didn't back down. We already have problems. The question is what you're going to do about them. For a moment, Marcus thought Richard might actually take a swing at him. The bigger man's fists were clenched, his jaw tight with rage. But then Richard seemed to remember where they were. On his front porch, in broad daylight, where the neighbors could see. Get off my property, Richard said again, and stay away from my family. Your family? Marcus shook his head. Mrs. Thompson and Daniel and Mrs. Miller, they're not your possessions. They're human beings who deserve to be treated with respect. And you're nobody, Richard shot back. A factory worker who thinks he's a hero. You want to save someone. Start with yourself. Richard turned to go back inside, but Marcus called after him. I recorded everything, Marcus said quietly. Richard froze with his hand on the doorknob. What? The kitchen window. You might want to close your blinds next time you decide to hit a woman. Richard's face went ashen. He looked around frantically, as if seeing the neighborhood for the first time. The houses nearby, the potential witnesses, the smartphone in Marcus's hand. You're lying. Marcus pulled out his phone and hit play. Richard's voice filled the air. I'll show you ridiculous. Then the sound of the slap, clear and sharp. Delete that, Richard demanded, stepping toward Marcus. No, delete it right now, or I'm calling the cops. Marcus almost laughed. You're going to call the cops? To report that I recorded you hitting your wife? Please do. I'd love to explain to them what I witnessed. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked back at his front door, probably realizing that Laura and Evelyn had heard every word of this conversation. What do you want? Richard asked finally. I want you to leave them alone, Marcus said simply. All of them. No more hitting, no more screaming, no more intimidation. And if I don't, Marcus pocketed his phone, then everyone's going to see that video. Your neighbors, your co-workers, your parents, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of man Richard Thompson really is. Richard's jaw worked silently. Marcus could practically see the gears turning, weighing his pride against his reputation, his anger against his fear of consequences. This isn't over, Richard said finally. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. Richard went back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Marcus waited on the sidewalk until his phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. He went to his room and slammed the door. Mama and Grandma are okay. Marcus typed back. Good. Remember what I told you. Call if anything happens. Anything. As he walked away from the house for the second time that day, Marcus knew he'd crossed a line. Richard Thompson wasn't going to forgive this humiliation, and he wasn't going to forget. Marcus had just made a powerful enemy. But looking at that video on his phone, seeing the fear in Laura's eyes, and the violence in Richard's hand, Marcus knew he'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Some lines were worth crossing. For 6 days Marcus's phone stayed silent. He went to work, came home, ate his simple dinners, and tried not to worry about a family he barely knew. But every night, he kept his phone on the nightstand, charged and ready. On the 7th night at 2:17 a.m., it rang. Marcus was instantly awake. Daniel, Mr. Marcus. The boy's voice was hysterical with terror. You have to come. Richard is really hurting Mama this time. She's bleeding. Marcus was already pulling on his clothes, the phone pressed to his ear. Where are you? In the bathroom upstairs. I locked the door but I can hear everything. Grandma tried to stop him but he pushed her down and she can't get up. The sound of splintering wood came through the phone, followed by Richard's roar of rage. "He's breaking down doors." Daniel whispered, "Mr. Marcus, I'm scared he's going to kill Mama. Call 911 right now." Marcus ordered, running for his car keys. "Right now, Daniel. Tell them there's domestic violence in progress and someone is seriously hurt." "But what if Richard gets madder?" "He can't get much madder, son. Call them. I'm on my way." Marcus broke every speed limit getting to the Thompson house. As he pulled onto their street, he could see lights on in several neighboring homes. Someone else had heard the commotion. He could hear the screaming before he got out of his car. Marcus ran to the front door and pounded on it. "Richard, open up." The sounds inside stopped abruptly. After a moment the porch light came on and the door opened a crack. Richard's eye appeared in the gap, bloodshot and wild. "Get lost. Let me in, or I'm calling the cops." "Already did that," came a voice from behind Richard. Marcus looked over and saw a middle-aged white woman standing in her bathrobe on the porch next door. "Police are on their way." Richard's face went pale. He looked back and forth between Marcus and his neighbor, clearly realizing his situation was spiraling out of control. "Everything's fine here," Richard called to the neighbor. "Just a little disagreement." "Didn't sound like a disagreement," the woman replied firmly. "Sounded like someone was getting hurt." That's when Marcus heard it. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Richard heard them too. His face twisted with panic and rage. "This is your fault," he hissed at Marcus. "You couldn't leave well enough alone." "Let me see Laura," Marcus demanded. "She's fine." "Then bring her to the door." "She doesn't want to see you." "Let her tell me that herself." Richard hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Marcus heard Laura's voice from somewhere inside the house. Weak but audible. "Marcus, is that Marcus?" "I'm here," Marcus called out. "Help me." Laura's voice cracked. "Please help me." Richard tried to close the door, but Marcus's foot was already in the gap. The two men struggled for a moment, before Richard gave up and stepped back. Marcus pushed into the house and immediately saw the destruction. A coffee table was overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the floor, and there were holes punched in the drywall. But it was the sight of Laura that stopped Marcus cold. She was sitting on the floor near the stairs, leaning against the wall. Her lip was split and bleeding, her left eye was swelling shut, and her shirt was torn at the shoulder. Evelyn knelt beside her, pressing a dish towel to a cut on Laura's forehead. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed. "It's not as bad as it looks," Richard said quickly. "She fell down the stairs. It was an accident." "I didn't fall," Laura said clearly, her good eye fixed on Marcus. "He pushed me. And when I tried to get up, he hit me again." Red and blue lights began flashing through the windows as police cars pulled up outside. Richard ran his hands through his hair, his desperation growing. "Laura, please," he said. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our life together." "What life?" Laura struggled to her feet with Evelyn's help. "This isn't a life, this is surviving." The front door burst open and two police officers entered, hands on their weapons. "Detroit PD, we got a domestic violence call." "Officers, thank God you're here," Richard said, immediately switching to a calm, reasonable tone. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." But the older of the two officers, a black woman with sergeant's stripes, took one look at Laura's injuries and called for an ambulance. The younger officer, a white man in his 20s, began separating everyone and taking statements. "Ma'am, what happened here tonight?" Sergeant Williams asked Laura gently. Laura looked at Richard, who was staring at her with a mixture of pleading and threat in his eyes. For a moment Marcus thought she might back down, might protect the man who'd hurt her. But then Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mama?" The boy's voice was small and scared. "Are you okay?" Laura looked up at her son, her brave 10-year-old son who'd called for help when she couldn't. And something shifted in her face. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something stronger. Determination. "My husband did this," she said clearly. "Richard Thompson hit me, pushed me down the stairs, and threatened to hurt my mother and son when they tried to help me." "Laura, no." Richard started forward, but the younger officer moved to block him. "Sir, you need to step back. This is my house. That's my wife. And she's making a statement," Sergeant Williams said firmly. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Laura looked around the destroyed living room, at her injured mother struggling to stand, at her terrified son on the stairs, at Marcus who had risked his own safety to help them. "Yes," she said. "I want to press charges." Richard's face crumpled. "Laura, please, I love you, I can change." You had 2 years to change, Laura replied quietly. Instead you got worse. As the paramedics arrived and began treating Laura's injuries, Marcus found himself giving a statement to the younger officer. He showed them the video from a week earlier, explained how he'd met the family, detailed what he'd witnessed tonight. You did the right thing, coming here, Sergeant Williams told him. A lot of people would have stayed home, figured it wasn't their business. It became my business the moment I met that little boy, Marcus replied, watching as Daniel held his grandmother's hand while the paramedics checked her for injuries. Richard was arrested that night, led away in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their porches. As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus saw Richard's face in the back window, not angry anymore but broken, defeated. Laura refused to go to the hospital, insisting her injuries weren't serious enough. But she did accept the domestic violence resources Sergeant Williams offered, including the card for a legal aid attorney. Mrs. Thompson, the sergeant said gently, you're going to need somewhere safe to stay tonight. Do you have family? Friends? Laura looked at Marcus uncertainly. We don't really have anywhere. They can stay with me, Marcus said immediately. For as long as they need. Sergeant Williams looked between them. Sir, what's your relationship to the family? I'm their friend, Marcus said simply. And they need a friend right now. 3 hours later, Marcus found himself back in his small apartment with 3 traumatized people who had nowhere else to go. Evelyn was shaken but uninjured, Daniel was exhausted but relieved, and Laura sat on Marcus's couch with an ice pack pressed to her face, looking like someone who'd just woken up from a long nightmare. I can't believe I finally did it, she whispered. I can't believe I actually called the police on him. You were brave, Evelyn said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. Braver than I ever was. Marcus looked up from where he was making hot chocolate for Daniel. You were in a similar situation, Mrs. Miller. Evelyn nodded sadly. Daniel's grandfather, Laura's father, he had a temper. Back then, there wasn't much help for women like us. Police would tell you to work it out at home. Neighbors minded their own business. I stayed for 15 years before I finally found the courage to leave. What happened to him? Daniel asked quietly. He died young, Evelyn said. Anger like that, it eats you up from the inside. By the time he passed, I'd been gone for 3 years. Laura barely remembered him. I remembered enough, Laura said bitterly. I swore I'd never let a man treat me the way he treated you, but somehow I ended up in the same situation anyway. It's not your fault, Marcus said firmly. Men like Richard, they're good at hiding who they really are until you're trapped. Laura looked at him with surprise. How do you know so much about it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. My neighbor Mrs. Washington. Her husband used to beat her every Friday night like clockwork. The whole building could hear it, but nobody wanted to get involved. One night I did get involved. Called the cops, gave a statement, the whole thing. What happened? He went to jail for 6 months. She stayed with her sister while he was locked up, got her life together, filed for divorce. Last I heard, she was remarried to a good man who treats her right. And her ex-husband, Marcus's expression darkened. Let's just say he learned not to come around anymore. The implication hung in the air. Daniel had fallen asleep on the floor, wrapped in one of Marcus's blankets, exhausted by the trauma of the night. Evelyn dozed fitfully in the armchair. Only Laura and Marcus remained awake as dawn crept through the windows. I don't know what happens now, Laura admitted. I don't have money for a lawyer. I don't have anywhere to live. Richard controls all our bank accounts. You'll figure it out, Marcus said. And you won't figure it out alone. Laura studied his face in the dim light. Why are you helping us? Really? You don't even know us. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When I was 16, my dad left, just disappeared one day. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, but she got sick when I was 23. Cancer. I had to choose between college and taking care of her. I'm sorry. Point is, I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like the whole world is against you, and there's nobody coming to help. Marcus looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. That boy shouldn't have to feel that way. None of you should. You're a good man, Marcus Johnson. I'm just a man who believes people should help each other when they can. As the sun rose over Detroit, casting long shadows through Marcus's small apartment, none of them knew that their troubles with Richard Thompson were far from over. They didn't know about the phone calls he was already making from jail, the strings he was pulling, the plan he was forming. They didn't know that the real fight was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Laura Thompson walked into the Wayne County Family Court building with her head held high despite the fading bruises on her face. The legal aid attorney, Janet Rodriguez, had worked quickly to file for divorce and a restraining order, but Richard's family had hired expensive lawyers to fight back. Marcus sat in the gallery behind Laura, along with Evelyn and Daniel. In the past 2 weeks, they'd become an unlikely family unit in his small apartment. Daniel slept on the couch, Evelyn took the bedroom, and Laura had insisted on taking the floor despite Marcus's protests. It was cramped and chaotic, but it was safe. And for the first time in years, Laura was beginning to remember what safety felt like. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Harris," the bailiff announced. Judge Harris was a distinguished black man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair, and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He took his seat and surveyed the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone who'd seen every variation of human drama. As he looked out over the courtroom, his eyes paused momentarily on Evelyn Miller. Something flickered across his expression: surprise, recognition, disbelief, but he quickly composed himself and opened the case file. "This is the matter of Thompson versus Thompson," he began, his voice steady despite the slight tremor Marcus noticed. "Divorce petition with requests for emergency custody and protection orders." Marcus watched as Richard entered with his legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, who looked like they charged more per hour than Marcus made in a week. Richard himself looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, but his eyes still burned with resentment when they landed on Laura. "Your Honor," Richard's lead attorney stood up, "my client maintains his innocence regarding the alleged domestic violence charges, which are still pending in criminal court. This divorce petition is premature and appears to be motivated by vindictiveness rather than genuine irreconcilable differences." Janet Rodriguez rose from the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor, my client has documented injuries from a sustained pattern of abuse. She's seeking protection for herself and her minor son, as well as reasonable support while these matters are resolved." "I've reviewed the police reports," Judge Harris said, his eyes carefully avoiding direct contact with Evelyn. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you wish to make a statement." Laura stood slowly. For a moment Marcus saw her hands shake, saw the old fear creep into her expression. But then she looked back at Daniel, who gave her a small encouraging nod. "Your Honor," Laura began, her voice steady, "for 2 years, I tried to make my marriage work. I tried to be the wife Richard wanted, to keep the peace, to protect my son and my mother from his anger." "Objection," Richard's lawyer interrupted. "Hearsay and inflammatory. This is a family court hearing, counselor, not a jury trial," Judge Harris said mildly. "Mrs. Thompson may speak." "Continue, ma'am." "Richard controlled everything in our house," Laura continued. "What I wore, where I went, who I could talk to. He said my family wasn't welcome in his home. He called us names I won't repeat in front of my son. And when I finally stood up to him, he hit me." Marcus could see Richard whispering urgently to his lawyers, his face red with anger. In the gallery, Richard's parents sat rigid with embarrassment, their carefully constructed image crumbling in a public courtroom. Judge Harris watched Laura intently as she spoke, and Marcus noticed his hands gripping the edge of the bench. "But that's not why I'm asking for this divorce," Laura said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm asking for it because my son deserves better. Daniel deserves to grow up in a home where love isn't conditional, where violence isn't normal, where he can be proud of who he is." She turned to look directly at Richard. "I forgive you for what you did to me. But I will never forgive you for what you taught my son about how men treat women." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Richard's lawyers had stopped shuffling papers. Judge Harris leaned forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand there was a witness to the alleged abuse." "Yes, Your Honor," Janet Rodriguez said. "Mr. Marcus Johnson is here today." Marcus stood when his name was called, making his way to the witness stand. As he was sworn in, he could feel Richard's glare burning into him, but he also noticed Judge Harris studying him with unusual interest. "Johnson," Janet began, "please tell the court how you came to know the Thompson family." Marcus told the story simply and clearly, finding Evelyn and Daniel stranded, bringing them home, meeting Laura, witnessing the violence, and finally responding to Daniel's desperate call for help. "And what did you observe on the night of the arrest?" Janet asked. "I observed Mrs. Thompson with multiple injuries consistent with being struck and pushed downstairs," Marcus said. I observed damage to the home consistent with a violent struggle. And I observed a 10-year-old boy who was terrified for his mother's life. Richard's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that you inserted yourself into this family's private business? I helped people who needed help, Marcus replied. And isn't it true that you have a criminal record for assault? Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd been waiting for this. Yes, sir, I was convicted of assault when I was 19. I served 6 months in county jail. So you're a convicted violent felon giving testimony about someone else's alleged violence. Objection, Janet said. Relevance, Your Honor. Richard's lawyer continued. This man's credibility is directly relevant to Mr. Peterson. Judge Harris interrupted, his voice carrying a warning tone. What were the circumstances of Mr. Johnson's conviction? Marcus looked up, surprised that the judge was asking for details. Your Honor, I was 19 years old. I caught a man sexually assaulting a 15-year-old girl behind a gas station. I stopped him. You stopped him how? I hit him. Several times. More than was probably necessary. Judge Harris nodded slowly. And the outcome? The man was convicted of sexual assault and served 3 years. The girl was able to go home safely. I pled guilty to assault because I knew I'd crossed the line, even though I was trying to help. The courtroom was quiet again. Judge Harris studied Marcus for a long moment, and Marcus caught something in the judge's expression, approval, maybe even respect. Mr. Peterson, unless you have questions relevant to the matter at hand, I suggest you move on. The rest of the cross-examination was routine. When Marcus returned to his seat, Daniel reached over and squeezed his hand. When Evelyn Miller was called to testify, Judge Harris's composure was tested again. He listened intently as she described the abuse she'd witnessed, the fear in her daughter's eyes, the terror of watching her grandson grow up in a violent home. Mrs. Miller, Judge Harris said carefully, you mentioned that you yourself experienced domestic violence in the past. Yes, Your Honor, my late husband, he had a temper. I stayed too long, made too many excuses. I don't want my daughter to make the same mistakes I did. Judge Harris nodded gravely, but Marcus noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he took notes. After all testimony was heard, Judge Harris deliberated for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of his pen and the occasional shuffling of papers. Based on the evidence presented, Judge Harris finally announced, I'm granting the plaintiff's petition for divorce. I'm awarding full custody of the minor child Daniel Miller to his mother, Laura Thompson. I'm also granting a permanent restraining order against Richard Thompson. Richard's lawyers immediately began filing objections, but Judge Harris continued. Furthermore, given the documented pattern of abuse and economic control, I'm ordering an equitable division of marital assets, with the plaintiff receiving primary possession of the family home and sufficient support to maintain her independence. Richard jumped to his feet. This is ridiculous. You can't just. Mr. Thompson, Judge Harris said firmly, you will remain silent or be removed from my courtroom. As Richard was escorted back to his seat by the bailiff, Judge Harris concluded the hearing. This court is adjourned. Mrs. Thompson, you and your family are free to rebuild your lives without fear. As the courtroom began to empty, Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. The hearing had gone better than expected. She had won everything she'd asked for, and Richard was finally being held accountable for his actions. But her relief was short-lived. Richard's parents, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, approached their group in the courthouse hallway. Richard's father, a stern man in an expensive suit, looked furious at the outcome. This is all your fault, he spat at Evelyn, his voice dripping with contempt. If Laura hadn't been dragged down by your baggage, none of this would have happened. Richard himself, flanked by his lawyers and a bailiff, was being escorted past them when he heard his father's words. Still seething from his defeat in court, he turned toward their group with pure venom in his eyes. You want to know what the real problem is? Richard shouted, his voice echoing through the courthouse hallway. It's that boy. A bastard child with no father, raised by welfare queens and criminals. He pointed directly at Daniel, who shrank behind Marcus. What kind of example is that supposed to set? A kid whose father abandoned him, being raised by women who can't even take care of themselves. The words hit Daniel like physical blows. The 11-year-old's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. I'm not a bastard, he whispered. My daddy didn't abandon me. He died. Same difference, Richard sneered. No father means no worth. You're just going to end up another statistic, another. That's enough. The voice boomed through the hallway with such authority that everyone froze. Judge Harris was striding toward them, his face dark with fury. He'd heard every cruel word from his chambers, and something inside him had snapped. "How dare you?" Judge Harris said, his voice shaking with rage as he approached Richard. "How dare you speak to a child that way?" Richard's lawyers immediately stepped forward. "Your Honor, you shouldn't be. I'll speak to whoever I choose." Judge Harris cut them off, his eyes never leaving Richard. "Especially when a grown man is verbally abusing a child in my courthouse." He knelt down in front of Daniel, who was still crying from Richard's cruel words. "Son," he said gently, "what that man said to you is wrong, completely wrong. You are worth everything, regardless of whether your father is here or not." Daniel sniffled, "But he said I don't have a daddy." Judge Harris looked up at Evelyn, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and growing recognition. The resemblance between the judge and Laura was unmistakable once you looked for it. The same eyes, the same determined jawline. "Actually," Judge Harris said, standing up slowly, "you do have a father. You have a grandfather too." The hallway fell silent, except for the sound of distant footsteps and courthouse business. Judge Harris turned to Evelyn, his voice gentle but filled with decades of suppressed emotion. "Evelyn Washington, you were pregnant when Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf Coast in 1969. We got separated in the evacuation, and when I finally made it back to look for you, everyone said you'd been killed in the flooding." Evelyn's hand flew to her throat, her face going pale. "Billy," she whispered. "Billy Washington. I go by William Harris now," he said, tears forming in his eyes. "I changed my name when I went to law school, wanted to start fresh, but yes, I'm Billy. You're Billy." Laura staggered backward, grabbing Marcus's arm for support. "This isn't possible," she breathed. "My father died in that hurricane. Mama told me he died. I thought he did too," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "When the storm surge hit, we got separated in the evacuation. I was 8 months pregnant, and the waters came so fast. They pulled me onto a rescue boat, but I never saw Billy again. When I asked about him later, they said," she started crying, "they said so many people died, and his name was on a list of the missing presumed dead." Judge Harris stepped closer to her, his own tears flowing freely now. "I spent 3 days in that flooding, holding onto a tree branch. When I finally got rescued, I was in a hospital in Alabama for 2 weeks. By the time I got back to look for you, the house was gone, the neighborhood was destroyed, and everyone said you'd been swept away. I looked for you too," Evelyn whispered, "for months, but there was so much chaos, so many people displaced, and then Laura was born, and I had to focus on keeping us alive." Richard, forgotten in this dramatic reunion, was staring in shock. His lawyers were frantically whispering to him, probably realizing that their client had just verbally attacked the family of the judge who'd ruled against him. Daniel, wise beyond his years, looked between his grandmother and Judge Harris. "So you're really my grandpa, my real grandpa." Judge Harris knelt down again, this time with wonder in his eyes. "If your grandmother will have me, yes, I'm your grandfather. The grandfather who's been looking for you and your mother for 25 years. Laura was shaking her head, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this revelation. "I don't understand. How did you become a judge? What happened to you after the hurricane?" "I rebuilt my life from nothing," Judge Harris explained. "The storm took everything, my family, my home, my job. I was lost for years, working odd jobs, moving from town to town, always looking for any trace of you both. Finally I realized I needed to make something of myself, something worthy of the family I'd lost." He looked directly at Laura. "I became a lawyer because I wanted to help families stay together. I became a judge because I wanted to protect children and mothers from the kind of pain I thought I'd caused by failing to protect you." Marcus, who had been silently supporting this emotional scene, finally spoke up. "Your Honor, maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," but Judge Harris wasn't finished. He turned back to Richard, his judicial composure returning with a vengeance. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice cold and formal, "you just verbally abused my grandson in my presence. You called him a bastard and attacked his worth as a human being." He stepped closer to Richard, who suddenly looked very small. "Let me make something crystal clear. That boy has more character in his little finger than you have in your entire body. He called for help when his family was in danger. He showed courage when grown men like you showed only cruelty. Richard's face had gone from angry to terrified. Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't know what? That actions have consequences. That words can hurt children. Judge Harris's voice rose. You didn't know that someday you might face a judge who wouldn't tolerate your cruelty. He turned to Richard's lawyers. Get your client out of my sight before I find him in contempt of court for harassment. As Richard was hurried away by his legal team, Judge Harris turned back to his newly found family. The courthouse hallway had cleared, leaving them in relative privacy. I know this is overwhelming, he said to Laura and Evelyn. I know you need time to process this, but I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping that someday I'd have the chance to tell you how sorry I am for not being there when you needed me most. Evelyn was crying openly now, decades of grief and loss pouring out. I thought you were dead, she sobbed. I told Laura her father was dead because I believed it was true. All these years she's been thinking she was abandoned. Laura, still in shock, looked at her father with eyes that held 25 years of questions. What happens now? She asked simply. Judge Harris wiped his own tears and straightened his shoulders. Now, if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be the father and grandfather I should have been all along. I'd like to help you heal from what Richard did, and I'd like to try to earn a place in your lives. Daniel, who had been quiet through most of this exchange, suddenly ran to Judge Harris and hugged him tightly. I always wanted a grandpa, he said simply. Judge Harris held his grandson close, overwhelmed by the miracle of this moment. And I always wanted a grandson just like you. As they stood in that courthouse hallway, four people whose lives had been shattered by violence, separation and loss, but who had somehow found their way back to each other. Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. A family that had been torn apart by a natural disaster was being reunited by an act of human kindness. The same kindness that had led him to help a stranded grandmother and grandson on a cold December night. Come on, Judge Harris said, looking at his family with wonder. Let's go home. We have 25 years to catch up on, reporter asked. Laura looked back at Marcus, who was holding Daniel's hand while the boy waved to his newly found grandfather. We're going to heal, she said simply. And we're going to help other families heal too. My mother, my father and I are starting a foundation to help domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system and find safe housing. And what about Mr. Johnson? Another reporter called out. How has he been involved? Laura smiled. Marcus isn't just a friend anymore. He's family. And our foundation's first initiative will be to help working families access legal services, because everyone deserves someone who will stand up for them. Marcus felt his eyes well up as Daniel broke away from the crowd and ran to him. Mr. Marcus, the boy said, Grandpa says you can come work at his law firm if you want. You could be like a detective helping people who need help. Marcus knelt down to Daniel's level. What do you think about that idea? I think, Daniel said seriously, that you're the best helper in the whole world, and I think more people need help. That night, as they sat around the dinner table in Judge Harris's house, a real house with a yard and enough bedrooms for everyone, Marcus thought about how much his life had changed in 3 months. He'd started as a factory worker with no family and no prospects. Now he was enrolled in paralegal school, working part-time at Harris and Associates, and living with a family that had chosen him just as much as he'd chosen them. Marcus, Judge Harris said over dessert, I have something to ask you. Yes, sir. I'd like to formally adopt you. Make this family arrangement official. Marcus stared at him in shock. Sir, I'm 28 years old. Age is just a number, Evelyn said, reaching over to pat his hand. Family is about love and choice, and we choose you. Laura nodded. Daniel's already been calling you Uncle Marcus. Might as well make it legal. Daniel bounced in his seat. Say yes, say yes. Marcus looked around the table at these people who had started as strangers and become his world. Are you sure? I mean, you're just the man who saved our family, Judge Harris interrupted. You're just the person who taught my grandson what real strength looks like. You're just the son I should have been looking for all these years. Marcus wiped his eyes, not caring who saw him cry. Yes, he said. Yes, I'd be honored. 1 year later, Marcus Johnson Harris stood in the conference room of Harris and Associates, looking out at the December snow falling on downtown Detroit. He was wearing a suit now, his first real suit, purchased for his graduation from paralegal school, and preparing to meet with their newest client. The Harris Foundation for Family Justice had helped 37 families in its first year of operation. They provided legal assistance, safe housing referrals, counseling services, and most importantly hope. Laura ran the day-to-day operations while studying for her own law degree. Evelyn managed the crisis hotline from the Foundation's main office, and Judge Harris had taken early retirement to focus on reforming family court procedures across Michigan. Marcus's job was unique. He was part investigator, part advocate, part translator between the legal world and the families who needed help. He specialized in cases involving domestic violence, and his background gave him credibility with clients who distrusted the system. Laura knocked on the conference room door. "The Mitchell family is here." Marcus turned from the window. "How do they look?" "Scared, hopeful, like we all did a year ago." The Mitchell family consisted of a young mother with 2 small children and her elderly father. Their story was depressingly familiar: an abusive husband, economic control, threats to take the children if she left. But there was something else that caught Marcus's attention. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently, "your husband, where does he work?" "Johnson Steel Works," she replied. "The night shift." Marcus nodded. He'd thought the name sounded familiar. "I used to work there. I might know him." "You know Tony Mitchell?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Yeah, I know Tony. He's got a reputation for pushing people around." Mrs. Mitchell's face crumpled. "He says nobody will believe me because he's respected at work. He says I'm just a welfare mom with no education and no options." "Well," Marcus said, pulling out his phone, "let me show you something." He scrolled to a video and turned the screen toward her. It was a local news segment from 6 months earlier about the Harris Foundation, featuring interviews with several families they'd helped. "This woman here," Marcus said, pointing to the screen, "her ex-husband said the same things to her. He was a supervisor at Ford, had everyone convinced he was a model citizen. Know where he is now?" Mrs. Mitchell shook her head. "Prison, 18 months for domestic violence, and this woman, she's working as a paralegal now, supporting her kids, and she testifies in court to help other women who've been where she was." Really, Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is wrong about a lot of things, but he's especially wrong about your options. You have more options than you know." Over the next 2 hours, Marcus and Laura laid out a complete plan for Mrs. Mitchell: emergency custody, restraining orders, housing assistance, job training, legal separation of assets. It was the same playbook they'd developed through trial and error, refined through success and failure, perfected through dozens of cases. But Marcus never forgot that each case was a family, and each family deserved someone who would fight for them. As the Mitchell family left with their packet of resources and appointment schedules, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of work that mattered. This was what he'd been meant to do all along. "Good work today," Laura said, organizing files at the conference table. "Good work all around. Your cross-examination notes for the Henderson case are brilliant." Laura smiled, "Learning from the best. Dad's been coaching me on courtroom strategy. How's law school treating you?" "Like it's trying to kill me, but I'm too stubborn to die." Laura paused in her filing. "Marcus, can I ask you something? Always, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help us that night?" Marcus considered the question. "I know what would have happened. Richard would have gotten worse. Daniel would have grown up thinking that violence was normal. Your mom's heart condition would have gotten worse from the stress. And eventually Richard would have seriously hurt someone, or..." He didn't need to finish the thought. "But that's not what happened," Laura said firmly. "That's not our story." "No," Marcus agreed. "Our story is different." Their conversation was interrupted by Daniel bursting through the office door, still wearing his school backpack and grinning from ear to ear. "Uncle Marcus, guess what?" "What, kiddo?" "I got accepted to the Science Magnet program. Starting next fall." Marcus swept the 11-year-old into a bear hug. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. And guess what else?" "What else?" "I told my teacher about what you do, and she wants to invite you to speak to our class about community service." Marcus set Daniel down, feeling that familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he thought about how much this boy had changed his life. "I'd be honored to speak to your class. Will you tell them about how you saved us?" "I'll tell them about how we saved each other." That evening, the Harris family gathered for their weekly dinner at the big house. It had become a tradition, Sundays at 6 o'clock, everyone around the dining room table that Judge Harris had bought specifically to accommodate their expanded family. Tonight they had guests. Janet Rodriguez had joined them, along with Sergeant Williams and her partner Detective Brown. Over the past year, this group had become an informal network of professionals dedicated to improving how domestic violence cases were handled in Detroit. "I have an announcement," Judge Harris said, tapping his water glass with his fork. "The Michigan Supreme Court has agreed to review our proposal for mandatory domestic violence training for all family court judges." The table erupted in cheers and applause. "If this passes," he continued, "Michigan will become the first state in the country to require comprehensive DV education for every judge who handles family cases." "That's amazing, Dad," Laura said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "It's a start," Judge Harris replied. "But the real work happens one family at a time." Marcus looked around the table at these people who had become his chosen family. Evelyn, who had found the courage to leave an abusive marriage and raise a daughter alone. Judge Harris, who had overcome addiction and spent 2 decades becoming the father he should have been from the start. Laura, who had broken the cycle of abuse and was building a career helping others do the same. Daniel, who was growing up understanding that real strength meant protecting others, not dominating them. And then there were the extended family members, Janet, who took difficult cases pro bono because she believed everyone deserved legal representation. Sergeant Williams, who had changed how her department responded to domestic violence calls. Detective Brown, who specialized in building cases that would actually stick in court. "I have an announcement too," Marcus said, standing up from his chair. "Oh no," Evelyn said with mock dread. "When you stand up to make announcements, they're usually dramatic." Marcus laughed. "This one's not dramatic. I hope I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Daniel asked. "For teaching me what family really means. For showing me that my job isn't to fix everyone's problems, but to help people find their own strength. For proving that sometimes the best thing you can do is get involved, even when it's not your business." Marcus paused, looking specifically at Judge Harris. "And for showing me that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be." "Here, here," Sergeant Williams said, raising her glass. As they toasted to family, justice and second chances, Marcus thought about how different his life looked now compared to a year ago. He had a purpose beyond just surviving. He had people who depended on him, and people he could depend on. He had work that mattered and a future that looked bright. But most importantly, he had learned that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates or legal adoption papers. Family is about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's hard. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're scared. It's about believing that everyone deserves safety, dignity and love. And sometimes, family begins with a simple decision to help strangers on a cold December night, when the decent thing to do is exactly what you choose to do. "So what's next?" Daniel asked as they cleared the dinner dishes. Marcus ruffled the boy's hair, looking out the window at the Detroit skyline twinkling in the distance. "Next we keep helping people, one family at a time, forever." Marcus smiled. Forever. Outside, snow continued to fall on the city, covering the streets where Marcus had once walked alone, transforming the landscape into something new and hopeful. And in the warm light of the Harris family home, a man who had once been forgotten learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is remember that everyone deserves someone who will fight for them, even if that someone is just a factory worker who believes in doing the right thing, especially if that someone is a factory worker who believes in doing the right thing.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.